2025 has been an interesting year for my music taste, with it evolving and devolving in very significant manners. My last year's top artist no longer being someone I listen to at all based on my own personal ethics. I also moved to a whole new way of me finding, listening, and enjoying my music. To begin, I think it's worth referencing my last year in music. Last year, I was undeniably obsessed with British deathcore, metalcore, pop band, whatever you want to call them, Bring Me the Horizon. Having listened to almost 76,000 minutes of their music late last year, that band decided to start using AI for a lot of different things, and I fundamentally disagree with generative AI, so I decided to stop listening. Now, originally here, I was going to go into a long-winded explanation of all of the songs that I discovered this year, but that would have made this video, well, over an hour long, and as much as I love talking, my voice would probably give out by the time that I actually managed to get that through. So instead, we're going to talk about how I find new music. Previously, I used to use things like Spotify radios and just generally what Spotify recommended me. Now, however, I use a decent variety of techniques. I'll go by Twitter and friends' recommendations, obviously, because that's how you get the most new music from most people. I will then go to reaction channels, people like Bogdan HXC and similar, and I will see what he's been reacting to, because I found that he has quite a good taste in music in comparison to me. So I will take some of his songs and move on with them, and beyond that, then finally, I will use a website which I cannot actually name because it is a piracy website technically, to look for new releases that have released that week. And that's how I find the majority of my music. Now, when listening to music, however, obviously on Spotify, everyone is pretty aware now that there is not actually a real shuffle. Your music will play the same 30 to 50 tracks no matter how long of a playlist you have, because it expects you to enjoy those songs, because it wants you on their platform for longer. Now, since I moved away from Spotify entirely, I now run a self-hosted music server and a bunch of nerd shit that nobody really cares about. That means that my music is now all very disorganized if I shuffle it. So, in my infinite wisdom, I have a long playlist which I do sometimes just shuffle and listen through because it helps me find some fun songs that I may have listened to once and then not really listened to again. But most of the time, I now have a much shorter playlist of about 50 songs that I update once a week to just enjoy. And that's how I find most of my music enjoyable at the moment. Usually I use that long playlist for just whenever I want to listen to music, and I use the shorter playlist as background noise for things. Now, I want to reference my favourite musical releases that I listened to in 2025. Now, a quick relevant note here is that these don't necessarily have to have been released in 2025, but they do have to be new to me, or be an extended release that adds some standout songs that surely do prove that they are better than the original release for me. Now, just a quick note, these are not an actual top 5 list. This is a list of albums that I enjoyed. I have not specifically put them in a list of top 5, and I don't intend to put them in a list of top 5. I think it's important for me to mention also that there will be some honourable mentions at the end of this, because there are some good albums that released this year that just didn't have much that I could say about them, that I still loved. Now, let's begin. To start, let's talk about Acres, the Host. This album was produced by Landon Tours of The Plot and You, and with that, it's no surprise that this album is 10 songs of back-to-back bangers, including a feature from the man Landon Tours himself on Push Me Away, a song which gives me a genuine eargasm every time it plays, with its usage of stereo sound to push you into what I feel is a heavily hypnotized state, until you can't help but sing along, despite how poorly you scream. Push me away! Beyond that, I also love Take My Last Breath from this album, on the first listen, with the electronic, dancey, metal feelings heavily presenting themselves when you just want to let yourself go a little, have a little fun listening to music, and not really think much. Finally, a song that did eventually grow on me based on this album was the opening track, Bloodlust. Fundamentally, it's a fun song with every single element I love, and for some reason I just didn't enjoy it on the first listen, but I eventually got round to it, so good enough. Not sure exactly why I didn't like it, but it's still falling into the category of my top releases of 2025. Now it's time for me to bring up a much more controversial EP. President's King of Terrors. Now, I do mostly understand the criticisms and hatred towards this band, and to be honest, I do agree on some points, but I still enjoy the music, and I'm not particularly that bothered about the fact that it's run by someone who very clearly has his hands in the industry already. Beyond that, though, let's talk about the actual music itself. And the release, because I think it's important to tell this story, because this is how I fell in love with the band as it came out. I was one of the first 1,000 people to listen to the first track, but I think we need to go back before that. At the beginning of 2025, a mysterious band was added to the UK's largest rock and metal festival lineup, Download Festival. This band then shortly after released a single called In the Name of the Father, which I listened to very shortly after its release, being one of the first 1,000 to hear it. This song blew me away. Truthfully, the over-engineered vocals really didn't sound nice to me at the time, and I'll be honest, they kinda sucked. But the instrumentation, the general production quality of the actual song, the sampled elements, all were perfect for me. And they genuinely inspired me when it came to the idea of listening to music with the idea of thoughts behind the song, especially with regards to the clear religious connotations they make in the song, which left me enamored by this band, to the point that I actually impulsively bought tickets to Download Festival, which probably wasn't a smart idea in retrospect, considering that I had been on my arse for about 6 months doing fuck all. But I still enjoyed myself. But let's just continue going on. Prior to Download Festival, they released one more song, which was Fearless, one of the most popular songs of theirs. For obvious reason, it's a very anthemic, wonderful, kind of generic pop metal song. And I love pop metal. I'm not going to sit here and pretend I'm a heavy metalhead or something. I love pop metal. I'm a baby when it comes to metal. But I loved Fearless as much as I loved In the Name of the Father, so I was very happy to hear it. Now, we need to talk about Download Festival, the final day, which I was completely shattered for. I had had a poor Saturday to the point that I'd literally missed Sleep Token, who were one of the other reasons I wanted to go to that festival. 2 times now I've missed that band. We'll talk about that later. But I was completely captivated by that performance despite my discomfort as the Ike for President advertisement began. The mysterious masked musical mediums walking on stage in a very uniform fashion, and the beginning of Fearless blew me away. Now, the volume of the speakers was piercingly loud, and I distinctly remember having a headache for the day afterwards. But it also had me screaming the words back at full volume out of my throat, back towards the band. And it was really fun. Now, as the time goes on, President began to play through the rest of this EP, excluding Conclave, obviously, and it was one of the most enjoyable EPs I've ever listened to live before release, because it was the equivalent of being in a listening party, but for a better version of the EP. Now, I'm not going to be rude, I do think that this EP could have been better without the vocal effects, but at the same time, I do love the EP as it is, and I ended up falling in love specifically with Destroy Me and Dionysus, which both became one of my favourite tracks of the year. I would say maybe beyond another one, which actually probably won't come up in this video, Casualty of Linkin Park from last year. But it also made me decide that I wanted to see them again in the new year, and holy fuck, God knows I couldn't get tickets for those headline shows, so I'm going to slam dunk North. It'd be wrong for me not to talk about Sleep Token this year, but this disclaimer from earlier is very relevant, where I mentioned that they don't have to be released in 2025. I am not placing even in Arcadia in this list. Honestly, it's not a bad album, but it's quite generic with very little substance in comparison to Sleep Token's other releases. I do still enjoy it, and I do appreciate that Caramel and... I forgot what the other song's called, but I do appreciate that Caramel is such a fun song, and it does tell a story from beginning to end, but it's not my favourite. Hey, Editing Rose here, just for reference, I was referring to Damocles. An album that does, however, land in this list for me is Sundowning Deluxe, due to its just extremely emotionally charged song, Bloodsport. A song which I honestly had previously written off because I thought it was just edgy, generic emo pop, which I'm, to be very blunt, not really a fan of anymore. I gave a second chance when I was sorting out my new music library, and I began to understand the cult-like following this song has gathered Sleep Token. Beyond that, the acoustic extras at the end of this album of Bloodsport and a few covers are just emotionally powerful and generally fun to sing along to. Oh, and also Gods is on this album, which I somehow missed when I was looking for heavy Sleep Token songs, so yeah, I don't really know how I managed this. Speaking of that, let's talk about my history with Sleep Token, because I've actually been listening to them for a few years now. I began listening to Sleep Token in 2023, I believe shortly after the release of Take Me Back to Eden, where I was going to Leeds Festival just after I turned 16, and I was looking for bands that were of interest to me, because I kinda found out the hard way that that festival really wasn't made for people like me anymore. Not to say that it's bad, but there weren't too many of the rock and metal bands that I had assumed would have been there based on previous lineups. I still had a good time, but I actually missed Sleep Token. I stayed in bed for the entire event after the Saturday, and just didn't even bother going to see Sleep Token, which, yeah, that was a regrettable choice on my part. Wish I'd gone to see them, but hey, you live and you learn. I also missed them at Download Festival this year because it was also kind of bad for me. I got quite sick on the second day of Download and missed Sleep Token then. Very rushedly went to go see Present on the final day, but it's fine. I swear, I do actually like this band. I swear Fate's out to just get me whenever it comes to seeing these live. Maybe in 2027. Now we get onto another artist who is very different to the first three. I think he is someone to watch in the long run, as he has recently become completely independent, meaning it cost me a fucking bomb to get a CD of his. Ransom. Now, he recently released the album Inertia, a heavily politically charged album with songs challenging the United States government directly, alongside expressing his distaste for Elon Musk, AI, and the modern erosion of digital privacy. All beliefs that I do share with him. Beyond this, I think it's also important to mention how this album also includes some of his heaviest songs ever, with an extremely dirty guitar tone on almost every single song, which will forever remind me of Tom Morello's releases, especially considering how much they've worked together in the past. My personal favourite songs are Little White Lies and Who's the Enemy, featuring a supposedly controversial Bob Dylan. Now, the final artist I want to mention in my top 5 albums of the year list is Caskets, with their album The Only Heaven You'll Know, which I actually had the joy at the very end of this year hearing live in Leeds. Very, very, very well supported by the band The Word Alive. Now, I originally heard Caskets back in 2024 at Slam Dunk North, where they initially interested me and I began listening to them. It's hard for me to place a favourite song on this album, as I very regularly change my opinion, as it's still quite new and I'm still learning to love all of the various songs. But the one I found the most heavily enjoyable as of writing this script was Our Remedy with Make Them Suffer, who I also fell in love with in 2024. But beyond that collaboration, I do also find myself listening to the single that actually introduced me to this vocalist's screams, Make Me a Martyr. The emotionally charming Sacrifice and the all-encompassing Save Us. Generally, I absolutely adored the previous two albums from Caskets, however, this album is on a whole separate level to these, and I would suggest that whether you've heard Caskets or not, give this album a chance with an open mind, because it might surprise you quite a bit. Now, before I do end this video, I also want to give some honourable mentions to some other albums that I found fun this year, and I'm going to just list them off for simplicity's sake. Let's begin with Thousand Blow, Buried in Jade, Turnstile, Never Enough, Windfall, The Void Between, Paleface Swiss, Cursed, the Complete Edition, Fit for a King, Lonely God, Thornhill, Bodies, Avoid, Creature of Habit, Abbey Falls, Life is Just a Temporary Plan, Croquill, self-titled, and Volumes, Mirror Touch. Now, thank you for watching. What did you think of my top 5 albums? And did I miss anything in particular, do you think? If you want to hear my first introduction to Linkin Park, click here. Or, if you just want to see my next reaction video, follow me on Twitch, where I'll be live this Friday evening listening to something new.